we're basically saying that we would refer back to the state statute and that all activity permits would be obtained from the EPD and also enforced by the EPD. And then the next section deals with the repeal of our existing ordinance. So we basically be removing that from our books and then reverting to the state statute.
Okay, that makes sense.
And we can obviously still have, someone come in like you suggested.
And this has to go through the city council after we decide that, this is what we're talking about, and they have to approve it, correct?
Correct, and we would have to have a public hearing as well.
Yeah, that's good.
And then our other option was to push it to the county.
Yeah, so that was just option one.
Right.
Which was the least path of resistance and reflected, what we were doing. In these other meetings, we've also reviewed the Habersham County permitting process, and we've also obtained copies of the Raven County land disturbance process.
Mhm.
And we discussed those briefly, and I'll make sure you get copies of those after this meeting.
Okay.
There were a couple of things that were brought up. I believe, Teresa, you brought up the fact that we have landowners that have property in both counties because we're right on the line.
Mhm.
So we would have to add some clarity if we chose that route as to how that would be handled. I would assume that if you look on a tax map, you would be able to tell, if you're on Raven County's tax map, then you would be able to see that as you would if you were Habersham, but obviously I haven't looked at that in detail.
Yeah, I would think that would clarify it, but I mean, obviously, if someone's gonna clear something to build on, they would have to go through some kind of an authority for, the inspection process or whatever. So we'd probably follow that path as well.
Yes, I think the other issue that was brought up with the two counties, and this was issue, I believe it was brought up by the mayor, is that even though there's fees associated with these different permits, that we would still have to have a discussion with those counties, and they're most likely not going to do it for free. So there would be potentially an additional charge to the city of Tooele Falls if we chose to say, if you're in Habersham, you do as Habersham does. If you're Raven, you do as Raven does. Then there would be, the enforcement would fall to them, but we would probably have to pay for that service.
Are there many houses that are in both counties?
I do not know that.
Definite, there's only one that I know for sure is, and that's James Tarpon's house. His house literally sits on the line. Half of his house is in Habersham and half of his house is in Raven. So
It's interesting.
Yeah,
Does he have to
there's a
send two
couple
checks?
on that side of the road.
he has to
Yeah.
pay taxes in both counties.
Does it?
Oh,
I think Terry Dobbs' house is that way too. Part of the Terry Dobbs, part of hers I think is in Habersham, part is in Raven.
oh, I
Maybe.
didn't know that.
And I'm sure that there's some
I
that's
think that
back
side of the
on
road is.
other side of Hickory that are like that, because that Habersham line is really close up there too. So
I don't
maybe,
think anybody on that,
like, it maybe
when you're coming up
Jimmy
on the west
Cash
side, but on the
or
right side.
James or somebody like that, that through there might be split.
Okay. There was another option that we discussed very briefly, and that was to basically just modify our existing ordinance to be a little less stringent than what it is today. Because it's a little bit, it basically says if you're gonna dig a hole in your front yard, you need a land disturbance permit for it. So we would need to change our existing, if we chose to keep it. But then the issue would then become training, enforcement, who would do that within the city, and whose responsibility would that involve, additional head count, those types of things. That, we could certainly suggest that to the council, and But that would be the other option that we spent just a little bit of time on. So that's kind of where we're at, so.
Okay.
Did I miss anything?
Excuse me, I missed that meeting that you're discussing, so when you get Harry, copies, could you give me copies too, please? And my email address, I guess,
I have it.
oh, yeah, okay.
So, when did we give you both copies of the Raven?
Well, that meeting that you're talking about, because I missed it.
So now, how, like, very much today, how is the city handling the fact of if somebody does want to dig a hole in their property, if we have an ordinance in place that says you have to get a permit, are people getting permits for that stuff, or how's that being handled?
They're getting permits from the state.
Okay. And that overrides the ordinance of Little Falls, so once they get a permit from the state, then they can go by the state's orders.
No, that's actually the issue. We've got two
Right.
conflicting. So we need to do away with the
Right.
Tallulah one and say, this is what we're gonna do,
Because it's a conflict.
which is that draft that we have. Or we need to do something else.
Uh-huh.
But right now, if somebody today was to want to do some development, they would go to the state for that. We're no longer issuing permits.
Well, I'm not sure, I mean, how everybody feels about it. And obviously, is that gonna be open to discussion for the public as well before, they choose something?
It will be at the council meeting.
Well,
They'll have to have a public hearing.
Oh,
A public hearing.
yeah.
One of the other things that I mentioned, if I'm right about this, didn't they say that if the permits are issued through the state, they can still come here and fill out the application and stuff here? They don't have to go to a state office, they can still do it at the city hall.
Yes, we did discuss at one point that if that's what we're gonna do, then we would provide the means available for them to do that. They can obtain a copy of the permit, they can fill out the permit, but at the end of the day, that approval is not gonna come from here, it's gonna come from the state.
so there's no cost to Tallulah Falls if we were in fact to keep it under state's rules.
That's correct.
But there would be a certain cost factor if we went with any of the other, whether it was to go with the counties or if we went back to our original ordinance. Then we would,
The counties would probably charge a fee.
right, well, and that would be an inspection fee, I'm assuming, and the-
Probably.
Is that not what they include in their application? fees?
That's in their
The permit
application. I think the concern was that,
If they're gonna charge us back for it.
yeah, there's gonna be another charge on top of that for their services.
Fees, or the services to the city.
Mhm. We would have to know what that was somehow.
Yes.
We would have to find out from Haversham and Raven what we're actually talking about. If we were to go that route, or if it was an option, how much actually would that cost? And then we can, that would kind of nail it down more as how much it's gonna cost someone to do that.
There again, my concern was the differences between the Raven County and the Habersham County ordinances. Because you're gonna have to keep them straight, which ordinances go with which county and what you can and can't do. And Tallulah Falls would still have an input there, even if it was issued by the county. So whoever takes care of it in Tallulah Falls would have to know both sets of ordinances.
Right.
I think they're pretty similar.
They
are.
fairly similar, but
That's the Habersham.
smaller differences.
I know this is an elementary question, but when you say land disturbance, does that mean a driveway, or does that mean
No,
for a house that's being built?
Any of that.
Any,
Anything, if you.
Digging a
if
hole
you
to plant your plant.
Yeah, if you stick a shovel in the ground and you disturb that land, that's land disturbance,
Do I need a permit for that?
right now. That's what we're trying to clarify.
So.
Well, if it reverts back to the state, correct me if I'm wrong, but the state says that you have to disturb more than an acre
that's
for
correct.
That's
them to get
correct.
involved.
That's correct.
So if we're, right now, this very day, if we're reverting back to the state, then you're not gonna have to get any permit unless you're disturbing an acre or more.
Right.
So,
There is also that, and that's where we're trying to figure out what we're gonna do, is there's a conflicting ordinance with the city of Tallulah Falls.
right,
That requires you to get a permit for any land disturbance.
right,
So right at the moment, they can say, okay, you've gotta have a permit if you set out fire poles.
right. I
But the
understand
state
that.
doesn't,
But we've
Who
already,
enforces that?
that's another question.
but we've already given up the city as the issuing authority for permits.
Mhm.
We did that back in apparently in the late nineties or something, I don't know that history. But, if you look at the Habersham schedule,
Right,
it has a similar issue because the land disturbance permit in review from 0 to 10 acres is $20 per acre. The city of Tallulah Falls, their old ordinance started with 0 as well. The state starts at anything over an acre. So basically, we would be giving the individual landowner the right to do something on their property, but if it's any larger than an acre, or if it's considered a development, or,
Anything other than a single family home.
I know that, up on Hickory Nut Mountain, there's lots and they're like half acres or 0.56 acres, so I would think we would want to include that. Because a lot, I don't know if I should say a lot, but I know there's some,
Well, you,
like that lot next door to me, I know is for sale, and I know it's, because I called about it.
you would still have to have a permit should you build. You would have to have a
But
permit
not to,
anyway,
but not to.
but not to, like,
Remove all the trees.
yeah.
And that's something that concerns me, is that. So what I'm saying, that to say it's not over an acre, you can pretty much do what you want.
that's a lot of land. An acre is a lot of land. My property is just about exactly an acre.
My property is listed in the deed book as being an acre.
Right,
And it goes from, if you were to follow a line from this little parking lot back here, straight back, that's my line.
Mhm.
And it goes all the way to the road around where Vandiver is. It goes all the way back there to the creek. And that's one acre. So
Right.
you can look at it and see, that's a lot of land.
Well, my point is this too, and I think this is something that we all need to consider, because it's an obvious thing. When you generalize land disturbance, it's one thing when you have an acre of land and it's a flat piece of land. But when you have a hillside with a slope, and you're still including that in the acre of land, that's a whole different thing that you're disturbing. And when you have enough people, if you allow somebody to clear an acre, and that's up to unpermitted, well, if this guy can do it, and this guy can do it, and that guy, you can have 10 acres individually all the way up the side of a mountain that gets cleared unpermitted.
And
Do you really
that's gonna,
want that?
that's
I
gonna
mean,
go
that's-
back to the
that's
tree
dangerous.
ordinance also. That was the reason that we were gonna talk about the tree ordinances, because you couldn't clear cut something because of the tree ordinance.
Right, well, that's a stopgap
Mhm.
for that, which is good. And the other thing with the tree ordinance too is we had a discussion on this today. You want to watch out, and it made sense to me about the tops of the mountains. Because you can change the look of a mountain from a distance. It starts to look like a saw cut rather than, all those things obviously need to be considered and talked about, so. But the tree ordinance is a completely separate thing
Correct.
than the land disturbance.
It is.
The land disturbance is, I would assume paramount, that we figure out which direction they want to go with that. And the tree ordinance is probably going to be a longer discussion.
It will be a longer discussion. But to your point, the idea there would be to protect the beauty of the land that we have up here and not allow someone to cut a 200-year-old tree that's just because they want to cut it.
Well, and that's the other thing too, I think that we should talk about and have a discussion about is what the species are. You know what I mean? And there's certain trees that can be cut and maybe need to be replaced. In other words, if this is your acre of land and you want to put a home here and you don't have any trees in these corners and you want to remove the trees here, you may want to plant something else to replace that. And I think, that's something else that we need to think about is the replacement, because that helps, obviously, in the long term.
So I think that was brought up in the last meeting too, replacing it with a better tree for that area versus
Makes sense.
necessarily what you're cutting down.
Well, let's, there is a, kind of getting a little bit off subject here, but there is a sensitive land tree ordinance already in place for Tallulah Falls. And we were gonna get copies of those here at this meeting, but I don't see them here, so that's something that I can email everyone later. But kind of rather than starting from
Yeah.
ground zero, that we would
Right.
take what we consider to be appropriate for sensitive land in the area, and then maybe back off from that, something that's more, realistic or less stringent for the rest of the properties. So in absence of not having that, perhaps it might be better to send that out to everyone.
Yeah.
And let's all read it over,
Sure.
and then we can start that discussion once we've kind of got the general basis for what's already in existence.
When we're talking about the cost, back on the land disturbance, when we're talking about the cost from a county, let's say our top idea was to go with the counties, Habersham or Raven. Those costs wouldn't be a cost for Tallulah Falls. That would be a cost that we would project on to whomever wanted to disturb the land.
That's not,
They would pay that
that is an option.
when they get their permit. This is the cost. And then that goes on. So we collect the money for Habersham and Reagan and they get paid. That's their cost of, you're passing it on to whoever the customer is that wants to develop their land. So there wouldn't really be a cost for Tallulah Falls other than the collection of it and passing it back. I mean, if we could look at that, if that was an option. I don't think that Tallulah Falls should accept any of the costs of that. That should be passed on to whoever wants to develop their land. So if you come and your land's in Tallulah Falls and you want to develop it and you have Raven or Habersham, these are the costs that are affected. And it goes, this kind of clear cuts it out with how much. Obviously, if you just want to do a garden or something like that, that's obviously a lot less money than it is to put a driveway in or cut a slab for a house. And that's probably why they do it that way. I think we have to start somewhere. In other words, we have an opportunity here to kind of think forward. This isn't always going to be a small town. The land that we have here is gonna get developed, whether we all like it or not. I'm sure that your family's seen the development in this town, that seems like a lot. Whereas somebody like me that's came in here, we've been coming here for 13 years, I believe now. But I moved permanently here last year. We're here for about a year now. And we haven't seen a whole lot, a little more than we want, but I'm just thinking that we have an opportunity here to think forward. Instead of just the immediate fix for right now, maybe we should think in terms of the future as well, when we present things, you know, to the town for approval. And I'm, you know, right now, as I'm looking at this, I'm thinking that possibly if the cost can be reflected onto the customer, that maybe the county may be a better option. I don't know.
Well, maybe the appropriate question back to, say, Habersham, for instance, is, okay, let's take the city of Clarksville, for instance. They're in Habersham County, so if someone in the city of Clarksville wants to develop a property, is there a county and a city fee associated with that, or is it just what we're looking at right now? Because if that's the case, if that's not the case rather, then I would think that the city of Tula Falls would be treated in the same manner. So therefore, maybe there aren't any additional fees, and we're just assuming that
No,
Habersham and Raven is going to try to, levy some additional fee. So maybe we need to ask that question.
yeah, well, that's a good
It's no
point.
different than Cornelia, Demarest.
Correct. Yeah, that's a good point for that. We should look forward to talking to some of these counties and cities and maybe see exactly what they do. And if there is a fee, how much is it? Now, obviously, we want to be reasonable. If somebody wants to dig a garden in their front yard. I mean,
Now-
you know,
I have one.
I believe you did look at the Raven County fee schedule, and Raven does exclude the first acre, is that correct?
For single-family residences.
For
But if
single
you're
family?
not putting a single-family residence on there, I think you had to have a permit for it.
So that is different than
Habersham.
Habersham.
What's Habersham?
Habersham is just a, 0 to 10 acres is
Oh, it's what
$20
this
an
is.
acre. Doesn't really give you an exemption for you building your residence for. They are very similar, though, the fee structure.
Yeah, the
Is-
fees weren't,
There's-
were gonna be pretty much the same. Because that was my concern, was what if Raven didn't charge anything and Habersham did, then you've got those. Some of your neighbor across the street could be paying a lot more money than you'd be paying to do the same thing. Or Jump
Right,
through hoops for the same thing.
right.
But I think they're pretty similar. I don't think there's a big disparity there.
So should we take this fee, in addition to maybe talking to the counties, also take this fee schedule from Habersham and just clarify with them that there is no exemption for the single-family residence? And it's not listed here, but
Right.
we should probably
Yeah,
just
and
ask the
and
question.
Raven didn't list it on theirs either. But when I talked to them, that's when they told me that that was a
Okay.
single family residence wasn't, so they might have Habersham might too.
So we definitely should ask that question.
I'm not sure that they're considering whether it's commercial or residential. I don't think the zoning, I think they're just talking about the area.
Yes, except for anything less than one on single family was exempt automatically. For Raven, yes, for Raven County.
All right, so we want to clarify the Habersham fee schedule. And then we also want to discuss the interaction with the other cities within these counties as to whether or not there are additional fees or
Yeah,
how that's handled.
yeah, I think that's a good idea. I mean, because like you said, there may not be a fee involved with it.
All right, we can certainly do that. What about the options that we've been discussing? Are there any of these that we want to at least rule out from further discussion?
I'm leaning towards not revising the Tallulah Falls ordinance. I don't know how anybody else feels, but I think maybe that might be a little bit too far. I don't know. I mean, but my initial feeling of just hearing about it. Of course, this is my first meeting, so.
Yeah, I would agree with that comment. I think that's a much longer process and it's certainly going to require a lot of time and effort to get that.
Yeah, you have enforcement issues and, you know, I don't think the state, I mean, I can talk to Heather about it, but I don't think the state would be interested in looking at anything other than what the state has for rules and ordinances and their own. They're not gonna enforce any town, so then that would fall back on to Tallulah Falls, which I don't think that would be the best right now. You know, maybe in the future, might be something that we could look at 10 or 15 years down the road, but right now, I think we're probably better off either sticking with the counties or the states.
Do you actually have this in the package from today?
I have this, I have the sensitive land district,
Okay, so we do have it. I just
I
haven't
have
looked
that,
at
and then I have the Georgia code.
it. Okay, I just completely overlooked it. Everybody has these two already. Okay. So the Georgia code is basically what we're talking about. That's what's in effect today.
Which is why I said about Heather, that when, you know, if we were to, which book this is here, right? This is the ordinance requiring planning and zoning. Well, no, this ordinance here is what reverts it back to the state, correct?
Correct. That repeals the current one and gets it back.
So I mean, basically, EPD, you know, what I suggested is that EPD look at this and make sure that we didn't miss anything. I don't know if they have already, maybe they already have.
Look at our draft ordinance.
Yeah, that, I mean, because we're basically taking that authority and putting it back on them, correct?
Mhm.
I mean, Heather, who's their agent right now, she'd be the one that they'd be calling. So, I mean, you know, if there's anything that we needed to add or subtract or whatever.
Yeah, so that first paragraph in section 2.003 refers back to 12.7.1, which is their, so we're not adding or taking away anything. We're saying the Georgia code is what we're going to use. Does that make sense?
Yeah,
And then everything from basically the third paragraph down is just the repeal process for our existing ordinance. Which you can see in section 1, we're talking about an ordinance that went into effect in November of 1989. So we want to keep that as a point of discussion. I guess is what we're saying.
Yeah, absolutely. It's obviously a viable option. And it's what we're doing basically right now. This just takes our part of it and our city out of it. And I mean, honestly, it looks to me like even if we went with the counties, I mean, basically all we'd be doing is referring the cost back to the counties. We just want to verify what those costs are. But I think we're leaving Tallulah Falls out of it as far as the inspection process and permitting process and all that is probably a good option. I don't think that we're in a position right now to hire somebody for inspections and obviously we would be responsible for looking at the plans.
Mhm.
If we went with that option,
They
we would be
definitely-
responsible for looking at those plans, and that's what zoning and planning does, correct?
There's definitely some training and
Yeah.
certifications involved, I'm sure. So I guess in an attempt to make this a smaller pie here, do you guys agree that trying to rewrite the 1989 ordinance is not a viable option this time?
I agree.
So Teresa, do we need to do a motion to exclude that as an option, or?
We could put that as a discussion point and do it that way, or we can go ahead and just vote on it and say we're gonna exclude it completely. Either way you want to do that.
Okay.
If all of us are in agreement that we want to go ahead and just take that option out, we can go ahead and put it up for a vote.
Okay, does somebody want to go ahead and make that motion?
I'll make the motion.
And a second,
I'll second.
all in favor? Okay. So going forward then, we will limit our further discussions to the state option. And then we will need to discuss the county options further once we have the answers to some of these questions.
Yeah, I think that's a good path forward.
So what's the next step after this? So now we've passed this, so what's the next step?
We're still gonna have to have discussion on whether we want the county or the state to be the one that is issuing the permits. And once we have that discussion, we can vote on that, and then we just, whatever we decide, we send it up to the council, and they have the, like, public hearings and the vote and all of that.
So I think for our next meeting, we come back with these answers to our county questions. And hopefully maybe try to wrap this up in March would be, sorry, in April.
Yeah,
Would be nice.
yeah, that sounds viable. I mean, honestly, I think if we can get a few questions answered, like the ones that were brought up about the county, I think we could probably finish our discussion on that next time and decide which of these two is the best option. I just want to rule out that either one of them is not the right choice for presentation.
Okay, if everybody's in agreement with that as the next step, and we'll place it on the April agenda, then I think now that we, and I apologize for overlooking that, but now that we do have the sensitive land ordinance, would like to move on and just spend a little bit of time discussing the tree ordinance, which is the, on our agenda, that was the new business that we were to discuss tonight.
I was able to go online and find some information about tree ordinances.
Mhm.
I don't know if anybody else has. But through the forestry online, they actually have a step-by-step program on how to write an ordinance for your city or town as to cutting trees down. It's about 28 pages long. Some of it doesn't have anything to do with what our particular situation is, but some of it made some sense and kind of gave an idea as to how to word certain things and how much land sometimes makes sense. So I don't know if anybody else has looked, but I did find that online. I could print that up and,
Sure.
get it to everybody, but
Does, Toledo Falls have a tree ordinance now?
Just the
Go.
one, they have just the one for sensitive land, which is what you have there in your packet. To my knowledge, there's nothing else in existence.
Is single family, what is sensitive land?
If you look at our planning and zoning map, there are certain sections, I think primarily that's close to the river
Okay,
and places like that that are already been designated as or zoned as sensitive land.
okay.
So this ordinance applies to those particular locations. So this sensitive land ordinance does not apply to single-family dwellings on Hickory Nut Mountain, for instance, or commercial.
yeah, see, this actually goes into slopes, 40 to 50% or more. Things like that. Which is, what I was bringing up earlier.
Yeah, as much rain as we get.
Well,
That could be-
yeah.
You could start clearing everything and that'd be
You
very.
have no idea how something is gonna affect a certain area, until something bad happens, and then it's kind of too late. So really do need to be careful, especially on slopes for erosion. And I know the EPD, that's another reason why we might want to talk to Heather, is because she's schooled on that. And she has a vast knowledge of affected area, even though they only get involved in an acre. She could also maybe enlighten us as to what the effect is on a quarter acre or a half acre on a certain slope. And they have a different effect. So I plan on calling her, but I didn't want to do it without discussing it with the rest of these members here, if they thought that was a good idea or not, to see if maybe she could come down and be part of the discussion about how many trees, how much area we're talking about, what kind of slopes. And I don't know if even they get involved with certain kinds of trees or.
I would be interested in that because, it would be an education for me because I'm
Yeah.
really limited to what I know, except I know I love trees and when I cut, I tried to plant a tree when I cut down a tree. That's about all I know.
Yeah. Well, I've got a giant cut through the back of my property, and it's a FPL easement, a faux pole and Of course, it came in handy when they were running the lines and, you know, but it's a giant swath cut right behind my property.
Yeah, there it is.
You know, and I mean, I deal with it because it's necessary. But if it's not necessary, I wouldn't want to deal with it if I didn't have to, is my point. So I just think that that's something that we really need to spend some time on.
So I would think this person that you have a contact with, I would think it would be good.
Yeah. Yeah, her name's Heather. Travis was a gentleman that, was my initial contact at EPD. And Heather has taken that over. She called me, I think Monday, and talked to me about it, gave me her contacts or email. And I have that, and I can give it to y'all. I can ask her to come down here maybe the next meeting, if I can't get that done. And then we can talk to her about it, maybe ask some questions, think about what we want to ask her. If there's anything you guys come up with in the next few weeks, maybe get a group of questions about it, tell her what we're thinking about doing, you know. And what I haven't been privy to the discussions that you guys have had, if any, about trees.
It's
Have
been
you guys
very,
talked about it at
It's
all?
been very limited
Very
because we
limited.
were focusing more on the land use
Mhm,
and stuff like that.
mhm.
I think it would be good to reach out to her and determine her availability.
Yeah, absolutely. I'll give her a call and see if she can't, and I'll let y'all know. I would love to get a fresh contact list for the email for you guys. So I can
Okay.
contact all of you. I can put it in my system. I've got to get with Mike. They just gave me my email for
It's
this,
not, you,
but I've got to put that in my phone. I tried to do it today and gave me trouble.
Yeah.
So, is that what y'all do? Did you put it in your phone?
No, I don't have it on my phone, but,
You have it in your computer or whatever?
yeah, I can send that.
Yeah, that'd be great. Yeah, if you guys should just email me at my email or whatever you want to have it, and I can list everything.
what is your email?
Did you get the email where he welcomed you to the planning and zoning?
No, I haven't opened, that's why I said I'm gonna talk to Mike tonight before I go home and see if I can't get it set up.
Did he send that?
Once you get it set up,
That was
you
my-
should have an email from me that, copy everyone here.
Okay,
So
good.
it already has everyone's email.
Perfect, that's all I need.
This is what he sent, and when he CC'd it to everybody else, so all of our emails are in there. So when you get that email, it'll already have all of our emails.
Awesome, that'd be perfect.
As long as your account was activated, and it should be,
I
because
think it was because Linda told me it was.
No,
It's just a matter of me getting it set up on my iPhone. I went through it and it wasn't accepting the IMAPs for whatever reason. Now I don't know if there's something I'm doing wrong, but I was gonna show it to Mike real quick and make sure that I can get that done. And then.
I actually had to download an app for Outlook to get it to work on my phone because it would not work through the mail on my iPhone.
Okay, well, that might be something that I have to do.
so you'd be able to take it as an action item to speak with Heather. then?
Absolutely. Yeah, I'll make contact with her and then find out what she says about it and then I'll pass it on to everybody.
And then your reference to the Forestry Commission,
Yes,
in section 1302 of the sensitive land document.
Yeah.
It makes a reference to to a document that was published by the Georgia Forestry Commission.
yeah, it might be.
Is
it
that
might
the
be
same
this-
thing that you're,
Let me see, I have it here. Yeah, this is, Georgia Forestry Commission is the site that it's on. And, it's a ordinance development guidebook for building a healthy community.
now where is that?
It is on the Georgia Forestry Commission. urban and community forestry.
Oh, thank you. Thank you so much.
And when I get my email set up, I could probably forward this link to everybody so that we're all on the same page. I downloaded it to my phone, so I have it. But it has things like Georgia Tree Council, Tree Ordinance Central, that has different ideas about ordinances. And then it has a glossary of tree ordinance terms, which familiarizes you with the terms that they use in there, obviously. Some of it's,
Do we know how other towns like Cornelia or Clarksville, if they have a tree ordinance or?
That could be something that we could check on also.
Was that, they're not as mountainous
also
as
has
this, but still
a
it's not be a
sample
place to
of a
start.
tree ordinance,
Sky Valley would be.
which, gives you an idea of
Oh, yeah.
what they suggest.
I think I'll ask Linda, maybe ask Linda, because she was there.
Linda lives up there.
She has a copy of that, I believe,
Yeah.
the one for Sky Valley.
You have a copy of it?
Linda does.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
That's what we were saying, maybe get a copy of a town, and Teresa suggested Sky Valley, and I said, well, yes, that's mountainous like around here.
Okay. So maybe in addition to having Heather come in, go ahead and try to get copies of a couple other communities, what I would say was, similar geographical
And
features.
so Sky Valley, but maybe not Clarksville, it's not as mountainous as here, but Sky Valley or
Even Cleveland,
Cleveland, maybe.
and
I work
Cleveland
in
has quite a
Cleveland,
bit.
so I might be able to get something from them.
That's a lot of the same kind of talk, a little more so, but I mean similar.
Right.
I think basically my concern with the removal of trees is not so much the individual removal of trees for, let's say, like a view, for someone if they had one tree that was, messing their view up, and they could remove that tree without disturbing a bunch of things, or they wanted to put up a play set for their kids, and they needed to remove a tree or two to do that. I don't think that's what we're talking about. What we're talking about is somebody clear cutting a quarter acre in their property or more, and I think that's the
One
kind of
reason they
things
have to
that,
cut those two trees on our property, because they're dead, and
yeah, I mean, that's maintenance.
Yeah, this existing ordinance even clearly calls out those exclusions.
Right,
If it's dead or diseased, or if you need to cut it down to prevent the spread of disease, that's already in here. It's applicable and allowable.
it just kind of makes sense. I mean, that's just common sense.
So this is a question, because I don't know anything about building. So like with my house, I had a builder to come in to suggest where my house should be put on my lot. Is that necessary? Is that the way it is? Or does the
Most of the
homeowner
time.
come in and say, well, the view's better over here, maybe I want it over here, but the expert said, well, no, because of the flow of the land.
From my knowledge, if you have a septic system and you have to have a septic system, that's what's gonna determine pretty much where your house is gonna go. Believe it or not, they need to come in there and find out where that's going. Because if you have 2 acres, or even an acre, and you put your septic, or you put your house where you think it should go, and then they come in and they start doing soil tests, and they say, this is where your septic system has to go.
Then that's.
You could be way farther away than you should be. And that's gonna cost you a lot of money and might cause problems and may not even work, because obviously the distance between your home and your septic, there are conditions. So believe it or not, if you have to have a septic system, the first thing you should do is find out where the best place for that is to be. Get your permit, and then you can talk about placement of your own. And quite frankly, that's where GC comes in, because they should know that. Any competent GC should come in and tell you that. Obviously, this is the greatest place for your house because of the view. But,
Right.
right? I spent a long part of my life in construction and probably found out just enough to get me in a lot of trouble, but I did, remember quite a bit. And hopefully I can pass some of that on and going forward and share that with us as we move along here, trying to make these decisions.
Yeah, there's a lot vacant to the right of my house, and it's only 0.56 acres. But the house on the other side, they've put a well on their property, the other side. So now there's I don't know if it's a decision. If a septic tank can even go there, because it's a small lot and it can't be close to the well, it has to be far back, from both sides of the property. And so, and the person, because I was gonna buy it just to have a buffer. And so he's gonna do a soil test now.
Yeah,
And if he can't have a septic tank, that's great for me, because then it'll be a lot cheaper. But, yeah, I learned a lot about what you're talking about from there. 'Cause-
well, they can put septic systems in proper land or certain spots, but they have to use like a lot of pumps and things like that. It's very expensive. So it's always a cost factor involved in it as well.
Well, that lot I'm talking about is so small, and it's like a pie. Most of our lots up there, where I am at least, that pie shape, and where the well is, it's some big, it's an issue. For him, not me.
It's definitely a consideration. Whether you can even build them on a lot.
Right. Normally should have been done when the land was divvied up in the first place, but.
Yeah.
Anyway, that's neither here nor there.
And where we are, I am, there's so many rocks that's an issue too, that was gonna buy a lot. And it just got, because where they're trying to drill a well, this was about, they just gave up on it because it was so expensive. And, so they just tapped on.
I want to ask, have you asked Mike or anything about, like, in other words, if we wanted to print up something, informational that was 10 or 20 pages long, do we have an office facility where we could do that for making copies? I mean, I don't want to do that in my house. It's going to get
Right.
expensive.
You can email it to Linda will print it for us.
Awesome.
Yep.
Okay,
She's actually the one that printed the documents we've been
that's
discussing.
great. Because if I go onto that forestry site, I want to print that up, and then maybe I could get a copy for everybody here, bring that to the next meeting.
Okay.
And as, like I said, a different, just an example ordinance, so just to compare.
Okay. So it sounds like we've got a lot of information gathering to do between now and our April meeting. I'm not sure, I don't know how you guys feel, I'm not sure how much further we can take this evening without having that information in front of us.
Yeah,
So,
I think we're at dead end right now.
So we'll get the information to review before the next meeting. Okay.
I'll
make
get
sure everybody gets it.
Cleveland tomorrow and get a copy of their tree ordinance, and I'll just email it out to everybody when I get it.
Okay.
And then I'm
And the
sure
same thing with Sky Valley, if Linda does have access to that, I believe she does, we can get that email out to everybody. You're gonna take care of the
The forestry,
forestry and then
And
also
call them.
contacting Heather.
absolutely. You can do-
And then, We also said we were going to contact Habersham, get clarification on their exemption, if there is one, for residential family on their land disturbance permitting process, as well as look at the surrounding cities within those counties, such as Clarksville, Clayton, and see if we can't verify what those fee schedules are prior to the next meeting. So we're trying to get as much, rather than, having it sitting on the table in front of us when we walk in the room, it makes it a little bit difficult to have a discussion. So,
Yeah, if we can get it
Try
out
to
to
get it out.
everybody, I agree.
okay.
Yeah. I'll
All right.
make sure to get my email set up here so I can be part of the solution instead of the problem.
With that being said, then we would consider the open floor discussion complete and then move to adjournment. Go ahead.
To adjourn,
Are you making a motion to
I
adjourn?
make a motion to adjourn.
Anyone better want to second that?
I'll second.
All right, we will adjourn the meeting then, and look forward to having a good discussion in April. Hope everybody can make it. And we'll try to put to rest the land disturbance, and then move our focus to the tree ordinance and start making some headway on that.
Absolutely.
Okay?
Yeah,
All right.
thank you all.
Thank you.